next part, and right now you've caught me actually threading my machine for tonight. I was switching thread colors back to the variegated rainbow I'm using. So what I have been working on is the On The Go 2.0 bag from By Annie Patterns. As I show you this is what we have been working on. Now today, I said that last week that I was going to go over on how to do continuous bias binding. So I'm going to go over, I've done part of it, and I'm going to show you part, but I'm going to explain where I got to get to this point. So when you have continuous bias binding, especially in the By Annie patterns, they tell you to cut a square of a certain size depending on the pattern you're doing. This one was 16.5, and the one I did for A Place for Everything was 20 inches. So it just depends on the pattern. They'll tell you how big. You can also calculate it. There's a formula out there. You can calculate it for yourself, and maybe I'll go over that in detail one time. But basically, for continuous bias binding, you take your square and you cut it at the diagonal. Sorry, I feel like I've got a hairball. Sorry about that. And you cut it on the diagonal. Then you take your two shorter ends and match them up so it looks like a parallelogram. I will show you on the instructions how this works, because this is not giving anything away other than the fact how you do bias binding. So you start out with a square, make your diagonal and cut it along that diagonal. Then you piece the two together, right sides together, and you will actually sew a 1/4 inch seam, and you press the seam open, and then you mark 2 1/4 inches up from the bottom, and your top is not going to be as big as the rest of your strips. Now, one thing that By Annie has you do is you just cut strips and then you sew them together. However, I don't do that. I'm going to show you what I do. So what I do is, if you have you do sew that seam, which I will show you right here. Here's that seam that we saw where the two triangles overlap each other, and it's pressed open. Now the difference here, if you look, my lines are equal with each other. Doesn't matter which way I go. And I have gone ahead and sewn this together, but I'm sewing the two long, or in other words, the longer side of the triangles together, with the start of my bias up here and the end of it down here, where you see it has that little bit of extra. And now that it's sewn, I can actually follow my lines that I drew, and that's why I did not use the heat erasable markers, because I want to be able to have it. I'm going to press it here in just a minute. I'm going to press those open. And apparently I had a loose thread. So I did some basting before I did that, because sometimes I have to take that out, so I baste it before I sew it a lot of the time. So as you can see, I just had a random thread there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go press that open, and then I'm going to trim all the way down. And then I will have a full set of bias binding for my entire bag. Now, I don't need the bias binding yet, so I'll wait to do this And I'm going to go ahead and start on the next step, which is making the interior slip pockets for this. And this will be used for like credit cards and things like that. So we're going to go over that. I'm going to go ahead and show you. I have these 3 fabrics. They are folded in half. They have been pressed just so they kind of have a memory of that. I have what they consider the best side, or what you're going to be seeing on top of each of these here. And each of these have had SF101 or woven interfacing fused to what you consider your best side. And I have 3 different pockets. So if you see, when they're going to be together, they're going to look like that. Now, to do these pockets, what we're going to do is we're actually going to fold it right sides together and pin that, and leaving about a 2-inch opening. It's definitely different. It takes a little practice getting the hang of doing that, but I'm not continuously sewing each one together, so that makes it a little easier for me for the bias strips. And I'll show you how I do it. I will cut it out before we get done tonight. But right now for these pockets, so like I said, those are my front. This does not have SF101 on it. We're going to take, and we are going to have to turn these. So we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides, leaving about a 2-inch hole on the bottom. Then we will trim our corners and flip it inside out, and we'll do that for all 3. And right now I'm going to go ahead and press the bias tape just to show you more where the lines are, and I will be right back. Bias binding, not bias tape, but since I'm making my own. But with this, there is an equation. I can always share that at a later date as to how big you make the square depending on how much you are wanting to make. But for By Any takes the guesswork out of it and tells you exactly how big a square to cut out when you do this. And when I did the Place for Everything bag, I think I had about 6 inches of bias tape left over, and that was it. So not a lot left over. So, and if you calculate it right, you should have. Now I have made bias tape before, and I miscalculated and had to go back and make like 8 inches. When I do the Clover backpack from Blue Calla Patterns, it uses bias binding, and I've made it, and sometimes I make it right, and it never matters how many times I've made that bag. Sometimes I make it right and make the right amount of bias binding, and sometimes I don't. So, and it's actually, it's not for bias binding, it's actually to make piping, but it needs to be cut on the bias, so kind of similar. So, just to show you. So, when you look, my lines are perfectly straight, so that when I cut, this is to be a continuous strip of binding, bias binding. So if I cut right here, just to show, I'll do the first couple layers just to show you. Now this is one of the most tedious parts, which is actually cutting on the lines, which is why you want to be able to have non-erasable markings when you do this, so they don't disappear. So just to show you, so that is my bias tape. That's how big it will be. So when I put my bias binding on, I will just fold it together. And I will sew it. But just to show, and I will cut that out before we're done. If we get all of the flap done tonight, then we will get that cut out so I can use it to do the binding for the flap. Alright, so first things first, we are going to do the 3 inner pockets, and these will just be set to the side for now. But these are pretty easy, so we're just going to do them, and as soon as I get the 3 pockets pinned, I will flip over to the sewing machine. You're very welcome, Melody. So have you been working on anything interesting lately? I've been prepping for a lot of stuff coming up in the future soon. I have a big market coming up first full weekend of March. So that should be fun. Making lots of stow and go bags. So right now, like I said, just pinning these together. And these will be 3 pockets that we will turn them right side out, then we will close it up. That sounds like fun. I also have a hoodie a zip-up hoodie I'm going to be making this weekend. The newest set of strikes from Retro Stitch Fabrics. I will be working on that this weekend. I'm going to make a zip-up hoodie. Really cool kind of like moths and mushrooms and stuff. It's kind of a cool looking pattern, fabric. Alright, so we'll switch to the sewing machine. So we will sew, and I usually start at the bottom and work my way up. Okay. Okay, and then we'll sew the sides. And I will do the same to the other side. Now, I'm only just going to sew the 1 pocket just to show you, because this is not something we're using tonight. So I just wanted to kind of keep in line with showing what different parts, and we will need this for the next part after the flap. But I will have those already done by the time I come back. I will have all 3 pockets, but I'm going to show you with one of them. Okay. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to trim our corners. So if you can see, I trimmed the corners. Oh, I love mine. I'm glad you're liking the Juki. I've had this one for about 5 years now. So I love my Juki. Moving, it still has a long, happy life ahead of it. Now, when I do like little pockets and stuff, even though this isn't a full corner, I still will trim part of the fabric away in the top corners to make that lay flat. I do all kinds of clothing for my daughters, especially like making Easter dresses and sewing. I have to make sure I switch to the right needle, but I like sewing, well, I don't like sewing it, but I sew a lot of netting and stuff like that for petticoats and stuff like that to give it the nice poof. So now we take our nice little stick in this case my little rainbow stick, and we will poke these corners out. And then I'm going to take it over to the ironing board and press it down flat. And then we will top stitch around the pocket. But yeah, I have been making lots of things for my big market. This is the big cross stitch market that a lot of my stuff goes to. I send a lot of stuff to cross stitch shops. So just to show, there it is all nice and pressed. I'm going to top stitch around it with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Like I said, I will do the other 2 pockets off camera, but they follow the same exact procedure as the first pocket. And we just go a little bit at a time around. Now, of course, when I go around a corner, I leave my needle in and just lift up my thing and pivot. So we have our completed first pocket. Okay. And so that's what all 3 pockets will look like when we are done. Okay. So the next part, we're going to sew on the flap. And the biggest thing about this is that this has, and as you can see, I just pulled off my thing that says flap on it, just so I don't mix up pieces of thing. So, on the back, it tells you to draw 2 lines, and then draw 2 lines in the middle. And then what you're going to do, this is a sew-in magnet. Okay, now it has a piece of SF101, so if you can see, it has a sew-in magnet, which if you've ever done sew-in magnets, they have this piece of like clear vinyl around it. And this is a magnet cover, which is SF101. It is the same exact size as your magnet. And what we're going to do, I've got it held in place. That's why it's not falling. I've got it held in place with double stick tape at the moment on both pieces. What we're going to do is we're going to actually take, and you need either a zipper foot or a narrow foot, and you're going to stitch a circle around the magnet. Now this one actually has it where you stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Now you're saying, well, why is the SF101 not fused on? This is the case, if you put an iron on here, you would melt this clear vinyl that's right here on the magnet. So I'll show you what this magnet looks like. Let me grab my other side of the magnet. So easier, I just wanted to be able to have that, to be able to show you, have that ready to go. This is the magnetic snap. This is a sew-in magnetic snap. So if you see, There's your positive and negative side. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to sew. Now the SF101 is over top of it, so it'll be completely covered. We're going to sew around 1/8 of an inch from the sides of the vinyl part to adhere it to our flap. Okay. Put my other piece in there so I don't lose it. So like I said, we're going to sew this down at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I will show you once I get that completed. Now I have, if you have ever done the Fiona fold over from Lynn's Handmade, that's the reason I had these snaps on hand, because I've made one of those and it uses the same type of snaps, the sew-in magnetic snaps. Now, one thing that's different is that she has you sew as close to the round part of the magnet as you can in the pattern. But this one is having me sew around in a square. But mainly this just covers up the magnet, the SF101, so that you're not going to have any issues with it rubbing on your fabric. Okay. Now if you're going, wait, you're going to be able to see the stitching on the front. You're not. And I'll explain that in a minute. So if you see, it is sewn. You can see the magnetic snap kind of showing through, but it is completely covered, so you don't have that clear vinyl rubbing on anything or the magnet. So the next part is that we have a piece that they call the flap facing. So if you can see up higher now that I've got, you can see the lines that I drew, the distance from the bottom all the way to the top, and you see my magnet is centered in between and centered in between, and these all measurements were given to me by the By Annie pattern. Now that top line right here, if you can see, now these are heat erasable marks. So, but what we're going to do is we have our flap facing, and yes, you can see it's my lining fabric. So hopefully it'll be hidden. But we are going to put the bottom of that right up against the line that we made at the top. So I'm going to pin this in place. And I'm pinning on either side, and I will pin right up at the line too, but I'm just trying to make sure that it's equal to either side of the flap. Hi Lucy, welcome to the live. As I said, I'm working on the flap for the on-the-go bag. And right now this is the magnetic, so I will show you the pattern. This is the pattern I've been working on for the last couple weeks. And right now we are working on the flap. Last week we actually made this zipper pocket and the slip pocket. So now we're actually doing the flap, which has a sew-in magnet right here. Now this is the lining side, and this is the front. But we just attached or sewed in our magnet, as you can see the little circle right here. Now this is the flap facing, and what we're doing here is that we are going to sew this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance and then fold it down. And I'll demonstrate. Okay. just sewing this at a 1/4" seam allowance. And you do need to make sure that you stitch it at that you back stitch at both ends. And just to show, so this is the flap facing. Let's make sure I did this right. Let me make sure my measurements are right. Oh no, that would be why my things look off. So here's a big thing. I'm gonna have to seam rip this and this because my measurements are off. This one up the top here is right. I went too high. I was wondering about that. This is called me having too much on my brain. So I'm going to, so even the best of us, no matter how many times we've done this, first time making this pattern, so not without shortfalls at times. So at least we had not gone far. And I realized that the reason I was like, I had to check, the bottom of this should have been even here. And I was like, something's wrong. So just to show, not everybody, no one is immune from having to use the seam ripper. So at least it's a very short seam for both of them, so that will be easy to fix. So I apologize for having to seam rip yet again. I was wondering about that. But we all learn, right? And we are, and toddlers are fun to have crawl over your lap. Oh yes, at least it's not vinyl. Vinyl could be bad. I have had to do that. And now with vinyl, if it was something like this flap, if you're sewing in the exact same seam, you can get away with it. But if you're sewing vinyl onto vinyl, it doesn't always work out. So I've been there, done that. I do that a lot. Well, not a lot, but I've done it enough times with vinyl. So the flap's pulled off, and now I will pull off the magnetic snap. The only thing here is the fact that I did use double-sided tape, but luckily it comes up pretty easily off of woven. So I'm going to go redraw my line that I should have there and fix that little snafu. What's also great about making your lines when you don't plan on them being completely permanent lines with heat eraser markers. And Lucy, you came in after I explained how I did bias binding. And if you see this, I will show you why I said the double-sided tape. Since this is, the sew-in magnet is encased in clear vinyl, double-sided tape sticks to the vinyl, not the cotton fabric, so, or at least not as well. So the double-sided tape, if you can see, is going to come, you can see it on the back of the magnet. Oh, I miss babies. Mine are 8 and almost 17. So my oldest turns 17 next month. So graduates in a little over 2 years. Because she goes to early college, so she'll graduate with her high school diploma and an associate's degree. So I miss the toddler age. I miss it a lot. Goes by too fast. There we go. We pulled all that out. So not too bad. It's annoying to have to pull out stitches, but it wasn't tons, and we can fix it. So I'm going to go, and because I used double-sided tape on the SF101, it's still tucked there. Oh, I know. But hopefully a few years down the road. So I'm going to redraw that line real quick. That's what happens when you have everybody getting home from school and husband's home from work. You get distracted in what you're doing. Yeah, that looks better. Okay. So definitely, I was wondering about that when I was putting that on. I don't know why I didn't catch it beforehand. Shows that even if we read the instructions completely, we may not catch everything. So if you look, now I have this square. I thought it was weird I had a big space in between it. But just to show you, now my magnetic snap fits perfectly in that square. Oh, wow. So now I'm going to actually sew around it again in the right location. Okay. See, that would have come into play a lot later when we try to have our snap on the main body of the bag. So at least that is fixed. Well, I miss babies, but at the same time, I don't miss babies at the moment. Don't have time. I have both of my girls in Girl Scouts right now, so it's busy time being cookie season. So right now, I'm a little chaotic. And my car is full of cookies. So, yet again, we are here yet again. I will show it one more time. Okay, so now that that is sewn correctly, you see it's got the 1/8 of an inch seam allowance yet again. And we are going to take this flap and sew it in the right place this time. So this tells you anybody can make a mistake, no matter how experienced you are. Doesn't matter if you're a pattern designer. You're going to have times that you will have to pull out that seam ripper. Me and my seam ripper were friends yesterday when I was making a reversible bucket hat for an order. So now we're going to sew the seam yet again at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Get that pin out of the way. But yeah, if anybody needs Girl Scout cookies in my pattern group I have, or on my personal page on Facebook, I have the link for both my daughters. Alright, so now we're back to the same part. So, now that we have done that, and like I said, this is actually placed at the top of this line. And this says we've done it right. Because now, when you fold that down, it goes down to the edge of the raw edge. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually take an 1/8 inch seam allowance, go from one side to the other, and across the bottom, back up the other side. So I will do that real quick. Just holding that in place. I'm actually going to take 2 pins so it'll hold it down for me where I want it. And then our magnetic snap is completely hidden, which is awesome. And you're now going, well, it's not hidden on the front. Well, it will be. So we're going to stay in our 1/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, and we will go all the way across. Basically stitching that down in place. Now, if you look closely, you're going to be able to see that it's a different piece of fabric because me not realizing what this was for, I did not fussy cut it. I probably could have, and it is actually still pretty darn close if you're talking about matching up the stripes, if I do say myself. So we have it, and now what we are going to do is the next part. We are going to attach the flap and pocket that we made last week during the live. So we have our zipper pocket, which of course will become, once we attach it, will actually form the zipper pocket. And then we have our slip pocket. So if you can see, there's our completed slip pocket. So what we're going to do is that one thing that they suggest is that you take double-sided tape here. And I'm going to go grab some 1/8 inch double-sided tape so that it will lay flat. And if anybody ever wonders where I get double-sided tape, I get it from Wizardry Stitchery, which is geekyhardware.com. And I use their double-sided tape. I find it's awesome. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, and I will show you as I apply it. This is right above my seam I have on the binding that I did at the top of this pocket last week. This is just to hold it in place. So just to show you, so there is the 1/8 inch seam allowance. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my pocket and line it up at the bottom. Make sure the ends meet. And pin it in place. And if you think this is too thick for pins, you can always clip it in place. So I will do 2 more pins to up the side just to keep it in place a little better. Okay, just to show you. This is what it looks like so far. So now I'm going to take the paper off of the double stick tape. Which sometimes wants to be more difficult than it should be. Gotta love when that does that, right? Love trying to get it started. Once you get it started, it comes off no problem. Just getting it started. So we are going to stick that in place. All the way across. And so, as you can see, it's stuck down. I've never had a problem with Wizardry really getting stuck on my needles, but that's just me. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go down and sew at 1/8 of an inch, starting from here, going all the way down, all the way across, and then back up again, and then right 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the bias tape. Okay. And that basically makes the flap one complete piece. And this also will close up the end of your zipper. So if you saw, my zipper was still long, and I will actually go back and forth over my zipper more than once, just to give it a nice zipper stop in the meantime. Going through all those layers, 2 layers of foam and like 6 layers of fabric, so it's a little thick. But I mean, my machine's going through it pretty well. Fun part's going to be when we do the binding for this. Like I said, when I'm at the zipper tape, I will go back and forth over the zipper a couple times just to make sure it's good and stopped, should I say. So basically I'm sewing 1/8 of an inch from the end, and this closes up my zipper pocket. So if you want to see the part we're at right now, I'm actually going to go this way for a minute. So this is what this looks like. So now that we have actually sewn this, when we unzip our zipper, which I can open it, I have a completed zipper pocket now. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to trim each side of the zipper tape even. And the way I do this is I will actually trim it from the back so that I can make sure it's nice and flush with the rest of it. Now, what I do have, as I said before, when I do anything like this, when I cut zipper tape, especially because zipper tape likes to ravel. Now, be careful, since you have cotton right next to it, I will take a lighter to it and just kind of burn my zipper tape a little bit so it melts. You're not trying to flame the world, you just want to basically burn the polyester threads so that it's not an issue. I'm going to trim that thread. Okay, so now we have our nice completed front. So now the way this flap is that it has rounded corners. So in your pattern, a 2.5 inch circle template, and this is in most of the By Annie patterns when you do binding, is that you will use that to mark the circle there and then trim it away. So I will show you. So I'm going to get me a marker. I've got fabric markers right here. And I will mark that corner. And I will mark the corner on the other side. Okay. Oh, I have one of those. This is a lighter. So if you can see, problem is I have to remember to actually charge it. Right now it has a little bit of charge, but I don't know how much it has. So most of the time I have a lighter nearby. But it does work well as long as you remember to actually charge it. So now that I have these corners marked, I will trim those. And after we trim them, we will stitch it back with, or baste it back with a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just to make sure that your fabrics don't unravel or anything like that. Just kind of completes it. Okay. Okay, so just to show you how it looks when it's trimmed. Nice and trimmed. It charges quickly, but the thing is you actually have to remember to charge it. Okay, so I'm just going to put this back over here. And we will do our 1/8 of an inch just so that we don't have any raw edges, and this finishes it off. Since we have our quilting going on the fabric, this just closes that up. And then instead of taking it off to do the other corner, I will just actually keep going across the bottom, because a little bit of extra stitching there is not going to hurt. Okay. So what's left to finish this flap is to actually put binding on. So I warned you that I have, since I wanted to show you how I did the binding, I didn't want to get it started. So I'm going to cut binding, and then I will show you how to do that. So heads up, trimming binding or cutting binding. So I said, this is what happens when you have to make bias binding. If I wasn't trying to explain how to do it, I would have already had it cut out. So all that's left is to sew the bias binding on for the flap, and the flap is complete. And we will finish that. This will take just a minute. Mainly that because you still got a little tube to go through to get your bias binding. But then you have a very pretty bias binding that matches your fabric perfectly. But I'm sure you can use pre-made if you really wanted to. I've not tried with one of the By Annie patterns, so but at least this shows that everybody can learn from mistakes. Like I said, I don't know what happened, why I measured wrong when I did my measurements, but it happens. It depends on if I want to, how much I want it to match. Sometimes I use it and sometimes I don't. Sometimes, if you followed around my cube, I actually do my binding, not bias binding, but it works very well. And I do that a lot of the time instead if I want something that matches. So right now we are going down the tube. About halfway down. Just takes time when you have to cut in a circle. Can't exactly do it with the rotary cutter, so it goes takes a little longer. But to be able to use it really, you need to cut it all down. Like I said, the Clover backpack, which is a more advanced pattern from Blue Callow. I love the looks of it, but it has piping that is cut on the bias as well as, so basically you're making bias binding, but you're using it for piping. And then you also have piping, binding. Now, I will tell you what I do with clear bags. I don't bind them at all. And if you watch my clear vinyl cube, oh, no. So I explained this tube at the beginning of the video. It's just now this is bias binding. So what I said, and you can go back at the beginning and video once it's uploaded. To get bias binding, you start out with a square. Cut it on the diagonal. Put two of basically making two triangles. And then you sew them together at one of the short ends for both of them, where I'll show you. And the big difference is that I don't do it like a lot of people do. I do continuous bias binding. So basically what this is, you start off with a square, you cut it in the middle in a diagonal, and you sew it together a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then you draw lines from the bottom up 2 1/4 inches, and you mark across. Now, one thing that's different, and now By Annie actually says to cut these strips and then you sew them together. I don't do that. So what I do, just as a difference, is that I will actually take the two long parts of the triangles and I will line them up. So if you can see my lines, this is from one long angle That's what this diagonal here is. And I'm trimming that, and this is making my bias binding. So I got it where my lines matched up from the two different triangles. And right now I'm just cutting it so that we have the bias tape for the entire bag. But that's the difference. Now, By Annie Patterns will tell you a certain size square, and that'll be enough bias tape for your entire pattern. Like this was a 16.5-inch square. The everything place for everything bag, it was a 20-inch square. So depending on how much is how much bias tape you will get. I buy bias tape a lot of the time, but for the By Annie, it's the way that you do the bias that you sew the bias tape on, because you don't use it like double fold or anything. So it's a little different. But we're almost there. One last cut through. As you can see, my tube has come down to next to nothing. So we're almost there. I do. I have where you sew the two triangles together the first time, and then so it makes a tube. That's why it makes a tube, because you are making it continuous bias binding. So I have the diagonal um, as well as the straight seam. Last little bit off. So you will usually have a strip at the top when you make your own bias tape that is smaller than everything else. You don't trim that off until after you are done making your bias tape. Here you can see the two seams overlapping each other. Okay, so here is all my bias tape. Okay, so to do this, what we're going to do is we're actually going to start sewing on the lining side. So the way By Annie actually does her bias is that we are going to fold it in half, like so, and we are going to put it against our lining side, and we are going to stitch 1/4 of an inch around all the way around. And then we are going to fold it over and stitch it down. So I will show you first. So I'm going to trim off that excess right here. It's my nice little diagonal. Okay. So when I do this, I'm going to clip it in place at the beginning and then just kind of follow it along as it goes. And I will do a clip, not a pin for this. Okay, just to hold it in place to start, and then I'm going to go all the way around, and you can follow me as I do that. And when we are done, we will have the completed flap for this bag. So this is a newer revised of the original on the go pattern. So I'm just holding this and just take your time, or should I say the zipper pull back out of the way so it's not and I do not usually clip it when I'm attaching the first side of binding, mainly because I can maneuver it a lot better as I'm going around like the curves. So I usually just kind of hold it down a little bit in front of it and stitch. And you can see I have lots of bias tape now because it's enough for the entire bag. But I don't want to waste any, so I don't want to trim down any more than I have to. So now I'm coming up around a curve, so I want to make sure I go a little slower there. So I make sure to stay in my curve. Going a little bit at a time. I said, I try not to go too fast around the curves. Now, when we're tacking it down on the other side, I usually move a little faster, being that unless I'm trying to hold it over the seam, and I'll explain what that means when I get there. Because what you're going to do is you're going to fold it over and cover up the seam you're stitching right now. So I'm getting right where two seams were meeting. So, like I said, having to follow it around. Okay, and we'll go around our second corner. Now, what's kind of nice about this is that we're not having to start and stop because we're going to the complete ends because this will be encased in our bag. So we are almost done attaching it to the lining side. And that will hide where we did our lining, um, our flat face thing, should I say, for the magnet. Almost there, just the last few stitches. Okay. Okay. So I will trim that even. Now I'll put my bias tape to the side. So now what we're going to do, we're going to fold our bias tape to the front. And I will actually use clips to clip this in place. And the big thing here is if you see this seam, you want to make sure that this is covering up your seam. So I will clip all the way around and I will show you before I stitch it what it looks like. And I apologize, I just hit my phone. So sorry for the bouncing camera angle. So I have some raw edges that are kind of popping through, so I don't want those sticking out, so I'm trimming them as I get to them. But yeah, Lucy definitely enjoyed the toddler years. My younger one's toddler years were definitely interesting, especially since she spent the majority of her time in and out of hospitals from about 3 to 5. So actually going to come down the bulk right here a little bit. It's really thick. I didn't trim that all there. So it's very thick to fold over. Almost done clipping. And I'm having things fall on the floor. So if you heard a random noise, I just had that lighter I was using earlier fall on the floor. So just to show you how it looks clipped. And this part is not going on there flat. I'm going to actually trim that foam is a little in the way. Trying to come out through the seam, or should I say through the binding. So I just trimmed it down a little. Okay. So now I'm going to stitch this down. at an eighth of an inch seam allowance. And then our flap will be done and we will be done for tonight. So I am stitching this down. Okay. Go a little bit at a time. So that it doesn't. Oh, probably because I'm going so slow. When I'm going slow, it's not very loud. Can you hear me? Hopefully. Yeah, when I go slow, the machine gets really soft. It gets loud when I'm being fast. It's the best way to put it. Actually going to. Hold on. Where is my thing? Okay. At least I didn't sew too far. But my bobbin just ran out, which happens. I have another bobbin prepped. Yeah, when I'm sewing very slowly, it doesn't make a lot of noise. So sorry I ran out of bobbin thread, but I have a prepped bobbin already, so made sure I was good. No, it's fab. At least I didn't sew too far. I have gone many, many inches and have to go, oh darn it, I have to clip everything again. And I'm actually going to trim this bit of foam that I missed when I did my trimming earlier, since I have it up from the machine. I gotta love the raw edges of fabric, so I'm going to clip this back. My Juki is a TL18. I love it. I've had it for about 5 years. It is an awesome machine, at least in my opinion. And let's trim the thread back from when the bobbin ran out. And apparently, like debris, which is not unheard of. Probably from all that seam ripping I did earlier. Let's see. All right, there we go. Line it back up where we were. I've heard those are pretty good. Do you enjoy it? I've heard it's a little bit lighter weight than the 18 QVP, but I've heard it's still a really good machine. Gotta love holding a stiletto while you go around the curve, so you keep your seams hidden. I've found I really like Juki's. Like I said, I've been sewing on this one since 2020. I got it actually before the pandemic hit. I had a really good show, so I bought me a new sewing machine after I killed the second one. That's awesome. Yeah, I've heard they're good, really good machines. Yeah, my person who does all my maintenance, after I killed the second brother sewing machine that was a domestic, he says, I highly suggest you go to a minimum, a semi industrial. So that's why I have the TL 18, so which has been an awesome machine. I had a little snafu in like June because what I found out is a common problem. The foot pedal, it has an automatic cutter, but it would just cut randomly while I was sewing. So I found out it's actually once I deactivated from the cutter, I could use that foot. Um, I also bought the one. I went and paid a little bit extra to get the foot that has two separate pedals, one so that does the cutting and one that does the actual going forward. I'm going to trim the threads. And so for tonight, that's it for tonight. This is the completed flap, front and back. Well, I wasn't using the cutter, and then I would just be stitching, and all of a sudden it would just very cut randomly in the middle of stitching. I use the cutter all the time, but here I can actually show you. It's a dual pedal. I ordered this from Juki Junkies. And so the difference is that this is the cutting and this is just the regular thing. But yeah, this is the one that is just the regular pedal and it is Juki brand. So this is a actual Juki. Apparently the ones in Japan actually come with this pedal, but the ones in the US don't, which makes no sense to me. So, well, I didn't have an issue until like last May or June. So it was a while. I mean, I went like 4 years without issues. So, and I actually deactivated the cutter completely in my other one. So it still works, but I like having my cutter back and it's completely separate, different circuitry. So no issues. So, but so that's it for tonight. We will continue with the rest of the on the go bag. I hope all that made sense for today. And I will see y'all next Wednesday at 9 p.m. And I hope y'all enjoyed it for tonight. Talk to y'all later.